So it's time for us to start. The agenda for today is, as explained on the invitation, divided in three major areas. One, the first one will be presented by Tim Davis. Tim is a principal program manager lead at Microsoft, and he will be focusing on where the industry is going vis-a-vis information security and more in detail regarding Azure RMS and Microsoft's capability in that arena. Followed by Joe. Joe Stalker is a principal consultant in Catapult Systems, and Joe will be focusing on the best practices for information classification and protection and how Catapult can really help in defining those scenarios and those matrices. And then I will be talking a little bit about how RightsWATCH for individuals can really address and tackle classification needs and protection needs in a very simple and seamless way for that to happen. I'm responsible for product management at Watchful Software. And then at the end we will have some Q&A sessions, 5 minutes, and basically what we are doing here today as some guidelines is you are all muted centrally, so you don't really need to unmute yourself, and this webinar is being recorded, which means that tomorrow you will have it available on Watchful Software website. As I've said, there's a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, and you're welcome in the meantime to enter any questions anytime using the questions feature in the GoToWebinar control panel. So while I was talking, more people joined in the webinar, and Tim, what we will do is I'll hand it over to you, and you can take it from here on your slides. Okay?
Okay, very good. Okay, everyone. Well, welcome to the webinar, and thank you to Watchful and Rui for inviting me to chat about the industry and what Microsoft is doing with our information protection platform. I'm always happy to talk about that. We're pretty excited about what we're doing, and hopefully we'll make this good use of time. So let us jump right in here. Oops, I think I went one too far on this slide here. There we go. Okay, so here are the trends that, certainly we at Microsoft have been gathering data and talking to customers, and I would be surprised if this wasn't consistent for most, if not all of you in the industry and the customer base. What kind of the trends that we see are IT challenges or opportunities and transformative emotions. One is, right at the top, consumerization, or what we call QOIT. Obviously, the world has changed quite a bit with what users expect and the quality of the experience they're bringing, whether it's an iPhone or whether it's their own personal laptop or coming from a web browser. We don't see nearly the tolerance for poor quality experiences or highly constrained devices in the past. Not that they were bad, but I think the consumer expectation of being able to access their information anytime, anywhere, on the device of their choice is certainly the reality that we face. And also from a Microsoft standpoint, we certainly recognize that those are not Windows devices anymore. Those are iPhones, iOS class devices, Android phones, web browsers, Chrome, whatever. We have to make sure that the information that we focus on protecting has to be ubiquitously available and accessible. If we don't meet that goal, we're certainly far from our value proposition. Second, major trend is the just complete explosion of data. And I think the growth of data has been well known for several years, but what is also becoming interesting is the number of places it's stored is certainly no longer kind of a corporate data center vault-based paradigm. As our customers sign up for SaaS applications, interop, outsource big data analytics to their partners, and for best-of-class services, it's very difficult to track your data being in one place in an essentially managed data center or storage vault. So both the size, the sensitivity, and the dispersion of that data is, I think, a first-class problem. And it becomes very difficult, at least in our opinion, to manage that data securely with traditional tools like firewalls or network borders and things like that. Third part is externalization of IT. Again, I mentioned it just a second ago with what we call best-of-class services. Your really able to mix and match services and be a data-centric organization without having to be necessarily locked into one particular platform or vendor. So as you deploy solutions on-premise or evolve your existing systems and upgrade them, you may actually interoperate those with SaaS applications. We obviously we've had Microsoft focus on O365 type of productivity suites, but those might be Salesforce. They may be best-in-class services from Google, or my colleagues down the street here in Seattle at Amazon. And the platform interop is really is mandatory. We don't see any reality of people going back to a model where they control the entire stack in a tightly managed environment. We see that being, again, a mix and match and an interop-driven paradigm. And then last major trend I think is quite salient to rights management is the social enterprise. And talk about this as, data is essentially a collaborative business. There's very little value in having your highly paid information workers create information that then's locked away and it's not usable. It's not very interesting. What we look at is anything that's valuable to your business or to your organization generally is meant to be shared between people. Now that could be the social enterprise inside your company. We see at Microsoft and certainly in many of our other customers widely dispersed V teams across the company where a V team may come together, be tasked or project focused, then dispersed. Your traditional AD or other org chart based security boundaries may not apply. They may be very transient and very project based. And I think 10x more important is this becomes cross-organizational collaboration. And I may have 3 partners and we're all working on a common project for a common customer or a quote or a marketing launch. And those people may not be in my company. They may be hired for the project. They may be sometimes if I do consistent business with. But again, many of my classic tools are much more difficult to apply when I'm sharing data across organizations. And largely speaking, that's an identity problem, that's a trust problem, which is one of the things where we think RMS can make a pretty big difference. And how we kind of recap that is kind of the network perimeter is dead. Again, I think this is a common meme that we see with our analyst community, with the Forrester and Gartner, that network perimeter is no longer an effective security boundary. And that includes things like devices and VPN access and software application services, where it's very difficult to apply any kind of border control to your data when it's permeating from desktops to services all across the business. So here are the kind of the key tenets of the Microsoft RMS solution, and I think this is fairly consistent with many of our colleagues across the industry. One is any file type. We don't see any reality of being an Office-centric business. Of course, we like to think Office is our first and best application experience, but customer data lives in 3, 5, 20 different formats. It's not practical for RMS or any other rights management solutions only to deal with Office formats. So what we've done is invested a ton of energy in making things like wrapped formats possible, what we call an e-file, where we still can apply encryption rights management to the container for applications and formats which do not have native integration. And we've doubled down our efforts to make sure all of our top application partners have native integration with RMS. And that applies essentially to all platforms. So we work with folks like Adobe, we work with folks like Foxit and NitroDesk and other productivity applications that actually are directed to end users, making sure those formats work. We're working with people like CAD vendors to make sure common CAD formats in various industry sectors are protected natively, as well as more proprietary formats coming from places like SAP or reporting system. Again, the goal is to make sure that the full native protection is embedded into the application stack, so those document types get the best of class protection. Second tenet here for us is that data shouldn't have to be unprotected in transit motion. Once you've applied protection and encryption, you want that policy to travel with it and live with that data at all times. And that kind of ties back to that borderless or no network perimeter anymore. You don't want to actually hand off data, and then in order to make it useful, have to unprotect it and put it in an unprotected container. You'd like it to be living and transferring in this protected format, and applications and services and users, in fact, all accessing the control mechanism so your policy is continuously enforced. Probably the most important thing for me personally is that we actually can make the share with anyone promise come true. Again, I think historically one of the major impediments to making rights management successful is the difficulty in cross-organizational collaboration. This is really right front and center with what I call the identity management problem, which is how do you trust partner identities, and how do you make it super simple and easy to use. And the way I actually personally think about it is, if I could email someone with any kind of SFTP-friendly email address, I should be able to send them a secure document just as easily. I don't want to have them sign up for a complex, expensive product to run a deployment cycle. I want them to do it with a couple of clicks, get up and running, and me as the sender feel very confident that my protection is going to be easy to use and consistently enforced. What we actually often see is if it's difficult to use, information workers will just opt out. They will find other ways to get their job done and violate corporate protocol, not maliciously, but just, again, to fulfill their tasks. So if I send secure information to one of my partners, and the first thing I get is, hey, I can't read this, could you send it to me again? Well, guess what? That sort of breaks the virtuous protection cycle, and people will then take that document and share it in clear text or share it in other ways that don't really meet the corporate security rules. Further talking about is what we hear consistent from our customers is, even though the numbers are small, being able to send to what we call social identity, social emails, like B2C, business to consumer, are also important. These are things like sending a secure document to someone at Gmail, or someone had a Microsoft account or a Hotmail.com type of account. And interestingly enough, many of these cases that we experience are things like a company having their board members or their attorneys actually on an external email account, where of course any company would give their board members an internal AD account or whatnot. But many of their extended executives or partners really don't want to log in with separate credentials. They want to use their personal accounts, and that's sort of their way to do business. So the information is still very high value, but being able to deliver to a consumer email and identity experience is a complete assumption. Again, not just the file types as I mentioned, but the applications. The full power of any rights management solution is that the user experience is highly integrated. While we do a lot of things where we wrap application formats, both on desktop applications as well as mobile devices, really that's not a great user experience. We want applications to be written to take advantage of the full protection stack and make the user experience fantastic. Whereas rather than, say, for example, blocking someone from printing a document after they attempt it, we would rather graciously display what's available to the user and make sure the application is written in a way that respects the data ownership and the policies applied. Again, our first and foremost partner has always been Microsoft Office Suite, but we do, again, have recognized that the vast majority of content that's published is often in a PDF format, so we've been working closely with Adobe and some other PDF vendors. And also completeness. We ship text and image protection ourselves, but we will certainly never be able to cover the vast majority of applications that are out there, so we work with a pretty aggressive developer evangelism story to get other partners signed up there. The varied organization needs, this really alludes to kind of the reality is, despite Microsoft being a cloud-first company, we have tremendous importance for our customers who are running on-premise software. And occasionally you hear us call it legacy software, but I really hate to call it legacy software. That is actually the mainstream deployment topology for many of our customers. So what we've recognized is, despite that we're investing heavily in cloud scenarios, many customers are either not ready or not interested in moving to the cloud anytime soon, but they still need a consistent rights management experience. And from an application standpoint, it's very difficult for us to evangelize to our developer partners to say, well, you get one experience if your customer is online, one experience if your customer is running on-prem software network data center. We basically focused on unifying those experiences and allowing our applications to mix and match with the customer, whatever topology that makes sense for them. And last, one of the other things that we think is really fantastic about the Microsoft solution, and I think it's a great industry design pattern, is essentially being able to reason over data. And this is really all about automated services being able to access your protected data, but still in a controlled fashion. So in the same way, we authorize individual users with an authentication chain to have them log in and demonstrate their identity and their access to data. We want that same paradigm to apply to services. And those are services like things like email scanning that we do with Exchange for malware scanning or virus scanning for protected email, as well as things like big data analytics where you can actually ship off a data set, authorize an analytical firm to only operate on certain fields of your data or certain subsets, and still have confidence that data has remained in a protected format, that you're given exactly the access that you see fit to your automated services, and have full auditing and visibility in how it was used. And along those same lines, we like to make sure that your key chain is maintained with integrity across all of these scenarios. So whereas historically you may protect the data with an encryption key, then have to share that encryption key out to someone who's doing some analytics on your data, that's generally unpalatable to many customers. You may have limited trust in one of your vendors in certain scenarios, but you don't necessarily give them the keys to the kingdom. You have to share your root protection keys to a third party for just one particular marketing project or engineering shared design cycle. So what we've done is put a lot of engineering effort into making sure you can delegate just the right amount of access, but not compromise your root protection chain outside of the RMS ecosystem. So I just want to kind of briefly recap some of the things that we think are important. One is we are a strongly rooted product in the Active Directory on-premise, as well as the Azure Active Directory as the identity basis. Virtually all of our authentication and authorization are rooted through there. Now, of course, you can use federated identity providers. We do support things like Ping and SiteMinder and other third-party products for the identity provider, but it's all through an Azure AD or an AD type of protocol stack. And so that is the foundation of all of our root of trust, and I think that's been a great system for us from both a manageability and a single sign-on end-user experience, and that's no plans on changing that. Just from an investment standpoint, I think recapping this is the borderless networking collaboration is first and foremost. I think every decision that we take is how does it work for sharing, how does it work for end users who may not be expert users of encryption. We need to make that super simple, super transparent, and basically ubiquitous, so we actually don't have to worry about adding protection, but we actually build in protection directly into every experience. The third piece is this recognition that the deployment topology is critical. For a while, as many of you I'm sure are aware, we really did not invest much in the on-premise RMS experience. We put the vast majority of our engineering into the Azure RMS experience, focused on O365 in these scenarios. But we heard feedback loud and clear that many customers were, like I mentioned, either not ready or frankly just not interested. They had other plans, they had other providers who were looking to go, but they still wanted the information protection integrated across their application stack. So we've doubled down and actually renewed our investment in the on-premise RMS experience, and I'll briefly talk about that in the next slide. And other pieces that we're doing, not just from the Office suite, but the O365 workload scenarios, we put a tremendous amount of effort into there. So I think you'll see the next period of time more and more O365 scenarios being lit up with RMS, and OneDrive for Business is one of the ones that is interesting. Things like DLP, digital legal protection rules, are being built into places like Exchange and eventually to SharePoint Online or RMS integrated, as well as consistent auditing and policy management. Today, sadly, the auditing and administrative experience of tracking how your data is used across O365 is somewhat lacking. And we are sort of front and center on making that a unified experience so you can see when your data is accessed by whom, whether it's a Microsoft service, an end user, or partner, and giving you a single point of visibility to those things. Again, also mobile devices, including things like iPads, Android tablets, Surface tablets. That is the future of where we think people consume and more and more frequently offer information. We'll recognize that working with folks like Intune and other third parties is key for basically hitting the mobile device management market. I hope in the next year or so you'll see some interesting news from us with some of our partners around building RMS directly into those experiences, and again, providing the same enterprise key management and administration experiences, but making those part of your existing MDM solution. Broad end-user reach. Again, if the application is not integrated, it's very hard to get customers to use these things, your end users, excuse me. And the last is what you'll see with our Azure cohort folks down the hall from me are basically building RMS technology really into the core Azure stacks. So not just for documents and email, but things like storage accounts, databases, are all going to be rooted in the same key chain as the RMS stack. So again, our theory is, or our intended theory is, sign up with us once, use that key in many, many places, whether they're desktop applications or service workloads, but you still get a consistent management experience and a consistent tracking experience with your own group protection team. And of course, close partnership with information protection ISVs and SaaS providers. We always speak very highly of Watchful, why I agreed to join RUI today. A fantastic solution. And we have a number of other ISVs that really are just front and center with us. We work with many mobile device vendors building RMS options directly into devices like that are Samsung or Knox-based. We work with file sharing partners like Tresoric and Intralinks, who are in the document management or file sharing business, as well as like Box.net or our partners of RMS, integrating that into their end user experience, as well as all sorts of classification vendors and vertical market specialists who are doing things like healthcare, encrypting data for markets like the U.S. HIPAA or other regulatory-driven requirements for the finance industry. So again, we recognize that we're a platform team, but the vast majority of customers don't buy a platform, they buy a solution. So we're looking to, again, be in very close partnership with our ISVs and SaaS providers to make sure that the RMS platform extends all the way up to the end user experience, which is what people really care about. And just a brief slide here, peeking ahead. I'd like to qualify this as usual that we don't really guarantee any of these dates, but we do get a kind of consistent ask for things that we're looking to invest in the next couple of months. I want to just kind of show this slide, talk about a few things at a high level. One is, I constantly say this RMS NG, what we call RMS Next Generation. That is something I think we're going to heavily invest in for the next year or so. And then one of the interesting things that we're doing is we're pulling that out of the Windows Server box, which is as a standalone workload later this year as a preview, and by mid-next year as a generally available product. And our intention there is to be able to innovate and ship that product much, much faster and keep the engineering core in sync with the online service, the Azure RMS product. Again, we've learned over the years that those products deviating really affects the ability for application developers to write a consistent product and a consistent experience to the end users. So one of our major investments there. Things like also migration toolkits and parity with Azure RMS and on-premise. One of the major deliverables we're doing in a few weeks is bringing mobile device endpoints back into AV RMS. That's been shipping on Azure RMS for a better part of a year. But again, many customers are just not interested in running Azure RMS, so we're fixing it up. And a handful of, I call them, kind of fun, interesting completeness features for policy extensions, multi-factor document authentication, universal cross-organizational groups will come next year. And really just rounding out the experience, so getting a better palette of platform support for both our ISVs and administrators to kind of customize the experience based on what their particular business requirements are. Ruben, I think I've actually cruised past my allocated time. I apologize for that, but I always get enthusiastic and I could probably talk for another hour. I want to make sure I give you and Joe plenty of time to introduce your topics as well. So thank you everyone for your time, and I would always appreciate feedback through RUI and any ways we can help communicate this story better. Love to hear it. Okay,
thanks, Tim. Well, now, in the interest of time, what we will do is, Joe, I'll end it over to you, and you can jumpstart from there. Okay?
Okay, great. And thank you so much, Tim. I think that was really foundational. As we move from what Tim discussed as far as industry trends and where Microsoft is going, and I would also really appreciated to see that that roadmap, as I'm sure everyone else was, as well. Thank you so much for that. So. What we're going to do now is shift over to, as a system integrator, Catapult Systems, implements Azure RMS, and, when we go out to clients and we're hearing what their needs are around RMS, that's where we actually found Watchful, because they can actually extend the RMS solution and provide some additional features and capabilities that we found that our customers need. And we also advise customers around policy and can assist them in identifying, maybe some gaps or issues. And so, just for the next few minutes, and I want to quickly, hand it to Rui so he can show you the product, as I'm sure everyone's really excited to see it. But first, before you implement a product like Watchful or even RMS, you really need to have a policy which really defines how you're going to be applying this technology to protect your data. And so if you don't have an access control policy today, I just want to provide you some of the things you should really consider including in that policy. So these are just some of the best practices, some of the things we found in a lot of our customer environments, and we agree are some really fundamental things that should be in there. So ultimately, an access control policy should really answer the who and the how, and I'll walk through each of those. But specifically, how is authorization for access granted to the systems and business applications? As it relates to user access, are those users going to be authenticated with just passwords, or are you going to actually require biometrics, or both, or multi-factor? Azure actually includes a multi-factor service, multi-factor authentication solution, which could be considered as well. So as you're looking at cloud and looking at Azure, that's something to be aware of as well. Secondly, how is access and use monitored? So a lot of organizations are telling us, and organizations that need to comply with HIPAA in particular are saying that it's one thing to protect a document with RMS, but it's another where you really want to see what happens to that document after it's protected to RMS. They want to be able to know if that document was printed, if that was one of the Azure RMS rights that was granted, the ability to print. They want to know, okay, who printed it? And that's another consideration for your access control policy is the policy going to be limited to digital content, or do you also need to be able to track when it's printed as well? And that's one of the things I really appreciate about Watchful is they can provide watermarking on documents so that if they're printed, that information policy is applied to a printed document. Another common ability is a screenshot. RMS natively will protect against screenshotting type applications, but what if someone takes a digital picture of a screen? The Watchful solution can actually have an overlay on top of the document which can display information about the document, and Rui will tell a really awesome story about how that helped a customer find the perpetrator of who leaked information later. But so how is the access and use monitored? That's a really important thing to include in the policy. Azure RMS does provide RMS logging where the use logs can actually be kept in Azure blob storage, and you can then, using the Watchful software, you can actually query those Azure RMS logs and really understand what is going on, who is accessing the documents, and we're talking about RMS protected documents here. So that is really a great feature within Watchful, and it's really something you need to consider for your policy. So another really important one is, who's going to be responsible for monitoring those logs? It's one thing to turn on the logs. It's another thing to really, enforce in someone's job description that they're responsible for, reviewing those logs and taking action and responding, when something happens in a log. So that really needs to be included in the policy. You need to set expectations, and sometimes during audits actually show that, you're actually doing those things and following through. Another access control policy, critical consideration is, who's responsible for creating and removing accounts, and who's responsible for granting access to systems and managing privileges. So the user responsibilities, it's one thing to create a policy for systems and for IT, but as users are consuming intellectual property and they're creating it, you want them to use the product, the solution, whether it's RMS and Watchful. When you actually go to roll out a solution, you really need to think about, how are users going to be educated on how to take advantage of this technology to correctly apply rights management to documents. And that's, I think, one of the things everyone should really key in on Rui's presentation later, is the ease of use at which Watchful allows for policies to be applied to documents. That's one of the extensions that it does within Outlook and within Microsoft Office that really makes it easy for users to actually apply policy. So for as far as the policy goes, you really need to think through these issues, how users are going to be educated, and made aware of what their responsibilities are. Relating to access and passwords, that's pretty important to make sure that they're aware not to share, their passwords, and having a policy which clearly sets expectations, that they shouldn't write them down and make them in plain sight, all those kind of obvious things. You would think it's obvious, but you'd be surprised how often, if you walk around an average company, how many people have the passwords under their keyboard and whatnot. So, that that is fundamentally one of the cases for multi-factor authentication is to not just rely on a password alone for protecting your data. Okay, and detecting and preventing phishing attacks is really important, especially today. We're seeing more and more spear phishing attacks that are targeted at individuals. So another best practice is separation of duties, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these two slides because, again, for the sake of time, I want to get this over to Rui. But separation of duties is really, really important, and these slides and the recording of this presentation will be made available for you to walk through these best practices. But maybe I'll just pick one or two of these. The key thing here is that the same person who creates an account shouldn't be the same person who's responsible for monitoring access to the data. If that were to occur, there's really a conflict of interest there. If someone, they could create a backdoor account, and then they could potentially go in and clear the access log that backdoor account was created, or they can even remove logs that they accessed certain documents. So you really need to think through preventing those conflict of interest to occur within an IT organization. Now I realize, for smaller organizations that don't have as many manpower, there is an impact to headcount to properly implement some of these things. Now, that's just one of the things to be aware of, especially if you're required to be compliant with some of the government regulations that, to do this right, you may need to add staff or even outsource some of those responsibilities. Okay, let me go on to the next slide here. So, principle of least privilege is also critically important. An end user really shouldn't have full control, say, for example, of an entire file share. Instead, there should be a information classification policy, and that should state how information is going to be categorized, how custodians are going to be identified and assigned, and what their responsibilities are, and as well as access and usage rights really should only be granted to those who have a need to know for that information. In general, the users shouldn't have local administrative rights to their machine. That can allow too great of a surface attack area for viruses and threats and worms and whatnot to gain control over the machine and then potentially get access to, say, a keylogger to be able to get the password and be able to get to your data that way by getting the identity information. So you really need to protect the endpoint as well. And so a lot of applications do provide role-based access control, which is really a key principle of least privilege capability, and I think Rui will be talking about how Watchful implements that as well. But let me just move on here to the next one. So one of the things about a policy best practices is I can kind of paint a broad stroke, but if you'd like to talk to, say, Catapult about your particular industry or your particular situation, we can help you. But policies do need to be specific to which regulations and what compliance issues that you're trying to protect and be compliant with. But I will say that markings and disclaimers can really help you with liability issues, auditability and compliance, and then metadata tagging can also help systems enforce policy as well, especially with Exchange. Exchange has an ability to look at metadata and apply RMS protection as well. And then one other thing I just wanted to mention is a system integrator. One of the integration options that really we found is very valuable is a scenario for Watchful, is when you're wanting to apply RMS protection to a file share. So many users still have file shares. A lot of users store data in SharePoint as well. But for say a file share in particular, if you're integrating with an on-premise file share and you want to enforce RMS protection, by default the Windows file share will just enforce the protection on Microsoft file types at this time. And if you want to apply that P-file wrapper technology that Tim was talking about earlier, you do need a third-party program that can be called to apply that P-file protection to non-Microsoft file types. And so as a system integrator, we found that Watchful has that capability. And so, if you do want to enforce the RMS protection across the file share, whether it's Microsoft file type or not, you actually today really do need that Watchful extension for that. So that's one of the reasons why Catapult's really excited to partner with Watchful to help our customers with the true end-to-end RMS solution. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Rui. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. As Joe said, I'm here now to give you a glimpse of what is known as RightsWATCH for Individuals. And RightsWATCH for Individuals is an entry level of a software suite called RightsWATCH that deals with data classification and data protection. And basically what RightsWATCH does is combining governance, information security governance model, a classification capability, the protection of RMS, leveraging RMS in order to do the encryption and the key dance and everything, and to enforce the access and usage rights, and also have some data loss prevention capabilities into one single software package. But what we are here today to show you is something that you already have. Just by registering to this webinar, you are entitled to get RightsWATCH for Individuals totally for free. Basically, RightsWATCH for Individuals is the combination of these four pillars: governance, classification, loss prevention, and protection in one single software package, as is his big brother RightsWATCH for Enterprise. It has a plug-and-play installation, so basically there's no server component needed. There's nothing that you need to set up on your system or your network. It's for you to download, run it, install it, and from that moment on, you will be able to classify your data. You will be able to apply Azure RMS encryption onto your emails, your Words, Excels, your PowerPoints, or any other file type using that P-file extension that Joe and team talked earlier, and immediately begin to classify and tag and mark that information according to an information security standard that was preset, and that is preset on the system itself. So again, encrypting and protecting that information using Azure RMS. If you do have an Azure RMS account, or if not, just join the Azure for Individuals account, and you will have that ability right from there. And what makes RightsWATCH in terms of user experience different, and how can it help? It has a single and standard interface, so there's no learning curve whatsoever for the user to start, for each one of us to start using it. It has an industry standard information security policy in the sense that it follows the best practices of what should be an entry-level information security policy, and place it right there in front of you. It shows and it has some content and context-aware rules built in. So it means that based on the content of what you're typing on your emails, on your spreadsheets, on your PowerPoint presentations and whatnot, basically rules are triggered so that you don't even have to choose to apply a classification level onto those emails and those spreadsheets and those words and those other files. Basically what it does is chooses for you. The system is pre-built with those rules. It's, as I've said, Azure RMS ready in the sense that you can plug in your existing Azure RMS account or your Azure RMS for Individuals account and basically start using RightsWATCH Individuals right from there. And it also has the watermarking, the tagging, and the marking that makes RightsWATCH such an incredible tool in order to perform that data classification. But the information security policy that we've chosen to apply in RightsWATCH for individuals is comprised of two what is known by RightsWATCH as scopes. One is the Azure RMS scope, and underneath the Azure RMS scope, users will be able to classify emails, for example, as do not forward, confidential, and confidential view only. So using the standard Azure RMS templates available. And each one of these has a preset of access and usage rights that you'll be able to do, or recipients of those emails will be able to do, and not depending on what they should be doing or not when following their need to know over that information. The other scope is related to classification only mode. So it means that you can apply Azure RMS to encrypt and enforce that access and usage rights, or you can choose to apply classification only levels, which means that you can apply a public or an internal or a restricted classification tag to that email message, for example, which means that you will have headers, footers, metadata being added or not, depending on rules that were preset on the system. And those rules are the ones that I'm showing right now on the screen. So there are a preset of rules that are built in and that the system will follow. So the policy will be triggered based on these rules and will apply a classification level or an Azure RMS level depending on the content and the keywords and the metadata or the file size, for example, of those of that data. Again, all this information is built inside the system in itself, which means that all of us, when using RightsWATCH for individuals, all of us will be able to show the tool, see the tooltips, and understand what the system is telling me that is doing. So basically, if you have nothing and if you want to start from zero and in 2 to 3 minutes have information classification capabilities and information protection capabilities right from there without any network or server component needed, RightsWATCH for individuals is really the tool for you to apply. But as I've said, RightsWATCH for individuals is an entry level onto what is RightsWATCH as a full-blown stack, a full-blown software capability that really addresses information protection and control coming from a data-centric approach. And if we divide, or if we rank or list, better yet, a set of capabilities that should be applied by a data-centric security software package, as having a multi-level security model being applied, having role-based access control, watermarking and fingerprinting, an easy user experience, etc., you will see that RightsWATCH individuals will provide you with the watermarking and fingerprinting capability, the ease user experience. And this is key in the sense that if we make it difficult, or if RightsWATCH somehow makes it difficult for the user to use, there's not a reason for the user to keep on using RightsWATCH. So we have changed the RightsWATCH around in the sense that we will provide, or RightsWATCH for individuals will provide the best user experience possible in order for you to do that data classification and data protection. The content and context-aware policy rules are also there. What does that mean? It means that based on a keyword on the subject line of the email, or in the body of the email, or in the body of that Word file, or that Excel spreadsheet, or something like that, will trigger a rule. And the metadata being added also onto those files can also trigger the rule, or the file size can also trigger the rule. Now, in RightsWATCH for individuals, you have preset of rules that were built into the software. In the RightsWATCH for enterprise, you can set up your own rules. You can have as many rules as you'd like. You can make those rules different depending on the governance model that you want to apply. And because we're leveraging on RMS, the access and usage rights are enforced on the user and whoever receives that file, whoever tries to open that file, etc., to apply that need-to-know capability over that file. The multi-level security model here is grayed out in the sense that, again, you cannot define your own multi-level security model, so you cannot define how many levels you want to have in order to tag and classify your data. You will have to live with what is already built in, and that is for RightsWATCH for individuals. Again, in RightsWATCH for enterprise, you will have the complete capability in order to get it. Moreover, you will have the ability to extend RMS and to extend the data classification and data governance capabilities onto your smartphones and tablets. So basically a user using an iPhone or an iPad will be able to render, will be able to consume and produce RMS protected content on their iPhones and iPads and Android devices and Blackberries and so forth, besides, of course, the Windows Phone. Extensive capabilities that RightsWATCH brings to the Exchange and SharePoint environments. A centralized admin interface that will enable each one of us to set up and fetch information from AD and set up and fetch information from the RMS server in order to make it work, and a complete audit trails and forensics. Again, RightsWATCH for individuals will not bring you all of this. It will bring you a subset of this as shown here, but is the very first step that you should follow in order to make it happen. One of the things that Joe said just a while ago that I think is really interesting for you to understand how, for example, watermarking is really interesting to have in decreasing corporate liability is the fact that an example of something that happened to RightsWATCH when a customer of ours added the graphical user ID from the RMS onto that watermark. So the watermark was really an alphanumeric code that was understood by rights management to see who did what, when, and how with that file, but for a regular user, that watermark meant nothing. When he did that, someone leaked that a piece of information. So it was a PDF file, and went for national television, on national television, saying that it was had understanding that someone was trying to do something that I was not supposed to. That customer frees that TV image, went to the audit trail and forensic analysis web interface of RightsWATCH, and with that alphanumeric code that was placed there, and that is something that rights management understands, was able to know who had printed that file and who had done what and when and how with that specific file that was shown on national television. This is just one example of how powerful the capability to extend the existing encryption methodology and algorithm and key dance of RMS upstream and downstream, as RightsWATCH does, upstream in data classification, data protection, downstreams on the logging and the forensic analysis, etc. is really key today. The last slide that I have to show you, and in the interest of time so that we can still answer a couple of questions and to follow those 45 minutes that I promised that this webinar will take, is just if you take nothing else from this webinar, take that RightsWATCH for individuals is something. It's a tool that is out there and that you already have just by registering to this webinar. It's for a tool for you to have world-class info security in 3 minutes. So you download it, you enroll in Azure RMS or Azure RMS for individuals, or if you already have it, you sign in, and from that moment on, you're able to have your data, your information tagged, protected immediately. And from that, you will have a best understanding possible on how to start, how to quick start an information protection and control project and move forward with for RightsWATCH for Enterprise with further use cases of Azure RMS tightly together with RightsWATCH in order for you to have the best scenario possible to protect and to classify your data. I would now go to questions and answers. I will try to see if there's someone that has a couple of questions. I see some of them here. And Tim, if you're there, there's one question just quickly that came on the questions and answers that says that, for example, what would you say to someone that is just starting, to deal with information protection and control, and when they're looking to Azure RMS? What would you say to them to convince a company in trying the Azure RMS and the powerful capabilities that it brings?
Yeah, Tim might be offline. I can take that one.
Okay.
So I would say, the first thing to do would be to try RightsWATCH for individuals. That way you can kind of get a feel for, what the capabilities of RMS does, because RightsWATCH for individuals essentially provides an easy-to-use user interface to kind of get your feet wet. Once you understand the default policies that come with that, then you can begin to kind of envision what additional policies that you might need to create for your enterprise, and that's where you could then step up to the enterprise solution. So that's really the best way to get started.
Okay. Joe, another one for you. Is if, could you elaborate a little bit on what would you understand to be the 3 most common mistakes people and most definitely companies do when dealing with information control policies? So is there some things that you must and should avoid when you do information control policies?
Yeah, so when you're creating your policy, a lot of people turn on logging and they turn it on all the way up. They just, log every possible event, and the challenge with that is if they don't assign someone who's responsible for reviewing those events and it's just logged, it really doesn't get them very far. So I think what you need to do is define based on the government regulations, compliance, and what your organization feels that you need from a minimal standpoint for logging, and only enable those things, and then make sure that you do assign someone who is responsible to review those logs on a periodic basis, and then you need to define what is a periodic basis. Is it daily, is it weekly, or do you want that to be a real-time notification that's pushed out to that user so that they don't have to log in and review the logs? So, one, like I said, is, make sure you're logging just the information you need. Don't, crank everything up unless you, absolutely have to have it all. Secondly, make sure you're assigning someone who's responsible to do it and hold them accountable, for reviewing it. Those are kind of the top 2 things. And then the third thing is make sure you have an incident response policy that defines what that person's supposed to do if they do see something in the log that, says that, some unauthorized access may have occurred. What are they supposed to do? How are they supposed to follow up with that? And those are the things I think a lot of auditors are going to be looking for as well.
Okay. Thank you very much, Joe. In the interest of time, what we will do is we will capture all the other questions that are here, and there are some of them, and we will make them available to everyone that joined us today. We will also make available the recording of the webinar on Watchful Software's website, and you will get an email from GoToWebinar with the link to that very same recording. Again, to us all, thank you very much for joining this. Joe, Tim, thank you very much. And we will be glad to answer to any other questions that you might have in a follow-up that you may want to have with us. Thank you very much.